Ewels, and he's the head of the facility of the Genomic Applications Development Group at the National Genomics Infrastructure, NGI. And NGI is a technology platform of SciLifeLab, which provides several services on molecular biology to different research groups across Sweden. We will be happy to take questions after Dr. Ewels' presentation, but he is also willing to take some questions during the presentation. So thank you, Philip. May you share your screen, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see if this works. Okay. Right. Can everybody see that? Excellent.
Yes, that's good.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all today. It's really nice to get involved in these kinds of projects and kind of try and reach out to people who are interested in working with Nextflow and NF-Core. Today, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit today, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about tomorrow about NF-Core, just to break it up a little. Today, I'm going to kind of go over an introduction about NF-Core, what the project is, kind of some key points about how it works and how it might be different to other kind of similar projects. And then I'll go into a bit more of a kind of tutorial about how to run NF-Core pipelines, how to set them up in your location, and kind of a bit of details about how configuration works with NF-Core pipelines. Some of it may be a bit familiar, hopefully, with the tutorial work you've been doing with Nextflow, but hopefully it all kind of ties together for a more coherent picture. Tomorrow, then, I will go into a little bit more detail about actually developing with NF-Core, how to create new pipelines, how to work with existing pipelines. Right, so NF-Core. What is NF-Core? The tagline we have for NF-Core is that it is a community effort to collect a curated set of analysis pipelines built using Nextflow. So hopefully you're all familiar with Nextflow, and NF-Core and Nextflow are kind of very intrinsically linked to one another. The main Nextflow authors, so Paolo, Evan, Cedric, we're kind of slightly, they are focused purely on Nextflow, the tool, and everything that can do. And we have a slightly different group of kind of core admins for the NF-Core community, but the two communities overlap a lot, which is great. Hopefully by now you're all convinced that Nextflow is this incredible, wonderful tool. I love it. It makes what we do possible in Sweden, and I'm sure it's a huge game changer for most people working in genomics and across molecular biology and beyond. So as you know, Nextflow can abstract away the complexity of running an analysis on virtually any compute infrastructure. So personally, we use Slurm, and we're also starting to use cloud services as well, and this is just amazing. And also simplifies working with software within pipelines, so that you don't have to install tons of different software packages every time you want to run an analysis, with built-in support for Conda, Docker, and Singularity. So what's NF-Core? NF-Core is then builds on top of Nextflow. Nextflow is a very powerful, very flexible tool. You can do anything with it, really. And so NF-Core is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum to that, where we say, okay, you can do everything, but if you want an NF-Core pipeline, you should do it exactly this way. We have very specific guidelines. And the main reason for that then is that all the NF-Core pipelines work in a very comparable way. So once you're used to using one NF-Core pipeline, it's a very simple transition to use any other NF-Core pipelines. They have similar ways of working, similar interfaces, all the documentation's in the same place. And they are hopefully all kind of gold standard pipelines. So we have strict guidelines. We've also written quite a lot of code, which is both in the pipelines themselves, but also helper tools, which are both for users running Nextflow pipelines, but also for people developing pipelines. These are all designed to work specifically with NF-Core pipelines, but the hope is many of them could also be used for whatever pipeline. It doesn't have to be NF-Core. You can just take out the NF-Core branding afterwards. And then, of course, we are a centralized location for a set of pipelines for anyone to come and use to run their own analysis. So if you visit the NF Core website, you'll see that there is a big button on the homepage saying pipelines. And if you click on it, you'll see the list of all the different pipelines we have. This is a slide I have to update every single time I give this talk, which is always a kind of a pleasure. So as of this morning, I think we had 27 pipelines with a stable GitHub release, which means that they are kind of certified. Once you have a stable release, that means that particular checkpoint should be reproducible. We have 14 pipelines which have not yet had a release, so they're still under active development. Doesn't mean they're not useful and not usable. It just means that they're kind of actively being changed the whole time. And once they get to that first release, then they'll be kind of certified. And then we have 4 old pipelines which are archived. We never delete pipelines if we can help it, so that for reproducibility, you can always go back and reuse an old pipeline that you've used. So once the pipeline is no longer being actively worked on or is depreciated, then we archive it. We're also very big on kind of the classic FAIR principles within NF Core, and very, very keen on open science and kind of community beyond just Nextflow and beyond just NF Core. And we have ongoing works with these 3 of the kind of the big players that jump to mind, so Dockstore, Bio.tools and Workflow Hub. And so we're working on integrations with all these platforms. So most of which are still ongoing, but all the NF Core pipelines, therefore, we hope are as findable and accessible as possible by being listed basically everywhere we can. And this is all automated. Key really to NF Core is, if you're going to remember anything about NF Core, is the community. The pipelines are great, but what makes NF Core really special is the community. These figures are quite out of date now, but the trends of the plots gives you an idea that since we've been started, I think we came up with the NF Core name in about the start of 2018, sometime around then. So not been around for very long, but it's been a pretty kind of linear growth of the community through that whole time, and a very fast growth, both on Twitter, Slack, where we do most of our day-to-day communication, and on GitHub, where we manage all of the code. And all of these graphs, this comes from a publication, but all of this you can see on the website under the stats, and that's updated live all the time. And 2 of the graphs that I'm most proud of are the pull request and issues response time graphs. And you can see that this is a really active community. If you go and create a new issue or add a new pull request contributing code, most of the pull requests are merged within, or at least got a comment on within an hour. And the same with the issue. Most issues have a response within an hour. So we're a very active community. Also on that page, you just see some bulk numbers just to give you a picture of how big we are. We're approaching 1,000 registered users on Slack now, which is mind-blowing. And over 1,500 Twitter followers, and 58 repositories. So because we have several repositories which are not pipelines, with thousands of pull requests, tens of thousands of commits. So this is now really gone way beyond my wildest expectations of what this community could become, and is a big machine now. One of the graphs I really like, I showed a screenshot of this a second ago, is the Slack users. So this is where we kind of coordinate most of our activity. And you can see that the number of people signing up to Slack is going up and up over time. We're just under 1,000 as of now. And this graph shows you that most Slack kindly categorizes people as whether they are active or inactive based on whether they've logged in and chatted, made a message within the last 2 weeks. So you can see lots of people are signing up to Slack, probably with a problem or asking for help. They ask for help, they get help, and then they go again and they don't kind of log back in, and that's fine. That's part of the reason we have the Slack organization. But if you filter away those inactive members, you can see how many people are regularly on Slack messaging all the time. And you can see that number grows, and you can see we're edging up close to 200, 150 to 200 people on Slack actively messaging all the time. So again, that really reinforces this fact that this is an active community with lots of help, which is critical. We're started off in Europe mostly, but we're increasingly based all over the world. This is the website's visitor statistics. So basically, wherever there's a lot of genomic research, especially, then we have people kind of involved in the community. And the main way we coordinate this is Slack. So you're using Slack for this workshop, so it's exactly the same. You just go to the NF Core website, click the big green join button, and you can get an invite that way. Earlier this year, I noticed Cedric mentioned this in the introduction yesterday. Very proud to say that we were successfully published in Nature Biotech. It's a very short paper, so if you're interested in how we set up NF Core and how the mechanisms behind the community work, then go and check it out. Like I say, the paper is only a couple of slides long. It's a quick read, and when the supplementaries is huge and actually tells you how things work. Yeah. Okay, so what's special about NF Core? Great, it's a community and everything, but there's lots of other communities where you can list your workflow. What makes NF Core different? As I say, the main thing really is these guidelines. If you go to the NF Core website, under the developers drop down, you can find these guidelines written out. They have changed remarkably little since NF Core was started a couple of years ago, and basically lay out what we expect of every NF Core pipeline. And we check them fairly regularly, we use them as reference point a lot, and every time a new pipeline comes to NF Core, we kind of check them off. The two which are really important to know about, which sometimes catch people out, and so it's really important if you're thinking about developing any pipelines especially, are that there should only be a single pipeline for a given data and analysis type. So we have an RNA-seq pipeline. So if you write your own RNA-seq pipeline and come along and want to add it to NF Core, we will say no. This is very deliberate, and it actually comes back to the original reason I wanted to start NF Core, which was to stop every group reinventing their own version of the same pipeline and get everyone to work together on a single, like, amazing super pipeline. But it does catch people out sometimes. So, and whoever basically comes to NF Core with a given pipeline first is the one that will be added. And after that, we're really happy for you to come with new ideas and new tools and extend that pipeline and customize it, add new features. But we will want to only have one pipeline per analysis type. It's a bit subjective, and it always will be. The other thing is that every pipeline should have a common pipeline structure. Like I say, Nextflow is very, very flexible. You can write your pipeline in a lot of ways, but NF Core pipelines must have a common structure and use kind of, we have a standard way of using parameters. For example, snake case, not camel case, and stuff like this. So what this translates to in real terms is that you should come and talk to us before you start writing your pipeline if you want it to be added to NF Core. The earlier you can talk to us, the better, preferably before you write a single line of code. We have a channel on Slack called New Pipelines specifically for this reason. And just come and say, I'm thinking about this. Does that sound like something that could be added to NF Core? And we can discuss it. And you might even get some extra collaborators early on. And the other thing is to really use the NF Core template. And this is kind of at the heart of much of what we do within NF Core, is we have this kind of gold standard template of all the kind of boilerplate code for our NF Core Nextflow pipelines. So when you run use the NF Core template, you get a lot of stuff for free. And it's also, we have a lot of automation built around this. So if we want to add a new feature for all NF Core pipelines, we can add it to a template and then automatically synchronize those code changes out to every single NF Core pipeline. And in order for that to work, your pipeline has to be based on the NF Core template. Right, so how does the template work? I mentioned these helper tools, and the template comes out of this. The helper tools are written, well, are started by me, and I think earlier someone was saying about having to learn Groovy and stuff, and of course, like most bioinformaticians, or many bioinformaticians, I'm more familiar with Python. So I wrote NF Core tools in Python, but it doesn't matter. It works very nicely with Nextflow anyway, and it's a helper tool that was completely separate from Nextflow that works together with it. You can install it, because it's Python, you can install it with pip or with conda. And it's just a regular command line tool. Live demo time. Right, what could possibly go wrong? So hopefully you can now see my terminal. And if I do NF Core help, you can see the command line usage. Can everyone see the text? Have I got the font size big enough here? Just wait a couple.
Yep.
Great. So the NF-core tool has a bunch of subcommands here. So the first ones basically are for people running pipelines. And then the second batch, which accounts for much more of the code behind the scenes, is all for developers. I won't touch this at all today, but I will go into it tomorrow. And this is the one that's relevant for using the template. But the ones for using can be quite useful. So for example, I can do NF-core list, and it will show me all of the different NF-core pipelines. It will tell me what they're called, give me some stats about how popular they are on GitHub, when they were last released, which is important, when the last stable release is, and also if I've got a copy of it locally on my system. This uses nice terminal stuff. So if I hold control on my keyboard or command, then you can see these are actually URLs, and these will take me to the NF-core website for that specific pipeline. And this command, for example, also takes search keys. So if I type list RNA, then it will give me all the pipelines with RNA either in the title or in the keywords. I can also have JSON output if you want it for downstream use, which gives us a whole load of information. So some nice kind of convenience tools here, just for kind of getting along with NF-core, and I'll come back to a couple of these in a second. Okay. Let's go on to running and using NF-core pipelines, which is kind of my main focus for today, I guess. Maybe you've already touched this in the earlier work, but it's generally our recommendation that you don't bother cloning NF-core pipelines. We don't really want you to edit the pipelines if possible, because that's bad for reproducibility. So it's best if you kind of let Nextflow pull or fetch the pipeline for you. And Nextflow has built-in commands to do this. So you can do Nextflow pull and the name of the NF-core pipeline. This is a GitHub repository name, so it's always NF-core / something, because we have a GitHub organization called NF-core. And this will clone that GitHub repository to your home directory in a hidden folder called Nextflow. And then we suggest that you always use the -r flag to pin a specific release tag, or you can also use a repository branch. This is good for reproducibility, because if you say -r version 1.2, and then you reuse that exact same command anytime in the future, it will always use that exact release of the code. And that guarantees that the pipeline code will be same. And because the code specifies the software container, which is a tagged software container, the software will also be exactly the same. So in theory, it should be basically perfectly reproducible. If you don't use -r, it will still run. It will just try and pull the most recent version on the default branch, which is usually master, which is usually the latest release. This also, you can see, ties into here. So if I do Nextflow pull, let's see, AmpliSeq, or maybe I'll pull an old version of RNA-seq. So -r 1.4, you can see the latest release is version 2.0. And then if I run this again, latest release is 2, and I don't have the latest release locally. I've got version 1.4. And if I do Nextflow pull AmpliSeq, oh, it doesn't work. You've got to love live demos. Let's try a different one. Nextflow pull cage-seq. I'm not quite sure what's going on here. But anyway, it should tell you that it's downloaded the latest release and tells you when you've pulled it locally. Of course, those tools require that you have an internet connection. It's in the background is just using Git and pulling it from the internet. So if you're running on a compute cluster which is offline, which many secure clusters are these days, then that's not going to work. So one of the helper tools that we have within NF-core is called NF-core download. You can see it here. And this does what it says, really. It downloads a pipeline for you. And the intention is to do that so that it makes it easy for you to get your pipeline onto a deployment, basically, an offline cluster, for example. And when you do this, it will download the pipeline code from GitHub. It will download all of the institutional configs. I'll come on to those in a second. If you use the ---- singularity option, it will build the singularity image for you. And then it takes all of these files and it just puts it into a tar.gz file for you, or different compressed type if you like, and even gives you the command you need to extract it, because I don't think anyone can ever remember those. So you have a single archive at the end of all this, and then you can just transfer that by whatever means to your cluster and extract it, and it's ready to go. This is also useful if you have, for example, automated deployment scripts and things. We have an automated deployment on our system, and we just have a list of the NF core pipeline names, and it just loops through them, downloading them all onto the cluster ready to use. Okay, configuration. So NF core pipelines can take configuration at multiple different levels, and this gets a bit complex, but I'm just going to go all over each level and explain what it does and how it works. You have the base configs, which is always loaded for every NF core pipeline. You have core config profiles, which come with every pipeline. You have institutional profiles, which I'll describe in a second. And then you have whatever custom config file that you give Nextflow locally. And these first three come with every NF core pipeline and work in the same way for every NF core pipeline. So the default base config is automatically loaded whenever you use an NF core pipeline, and it comes with basically kind of sensible defaults. So this is where the pipeline authors say, this tool usually needs this many CPUs and this much memory, and that's kind of probably a sensible default for most people. It does not specify anything about software packaging, so the pipeline will just assume that you have all tools installed, which you probably don't. And it won't do anything clever with job submissions, so it will just run locally, which you probably don't want either. But it's a good kind of starting point for the config. So built on top of that, every pipeline comes with a set of kind of core config profiles. I'm not sure if you've covered profiles or not, but basically when you write an Nextflow config file, you can bundle a chunk of config under a namespace called a profile. And then when you run Nextflow, you can say -profile, whatever, and that chunk of config will be used. So every NF core pipeline comes with a few of these, and the main reason we use these is to specify software packaging. So we have a profile called Singularity, we have a profile called Docker, we have a profile called Conda. So when you run your pipeline, you just do -profile Docker, and it will use Docker. We also have a few other common presets which are there to use. Probably the most commonly used one is the preset called test, which I'll come on to in a second. And that runs a test. You can specify as many of these config profiles as you want. They are applied in the order that you specify, and you just do them as a comma separated list. But it is important that you don't use any spaces after that comma, because then it will break up that flag. So here, test, comma, singularity, it will run the test profile, and then it will apply the singularity profile. So it will use singularity software packaging. So institutional profiles was something we brought in maybe a year or so ago. And originally we had every pipeline from the template would have these config profiles, which were set for different institutes. So in Sweden, we have a computational cluster called UppMax, and we have a profile called UppMax. And we had profiles for all these different institutes all over the world. But this was not a great way to do it, because if you wanted to change something in that config, then you'd have to change the template, then you'd have to wait for all the different pipeline developers to update from the template. And it took a long time to roll out just a simple change. So we came up with this new approach called institutional profiles. And this is actually an NF core repository called nfcore/configs. And all this repository has is just configs. And the key thing is that the NF core pipelines, all of the NF core pipelines, pull this repository at the time that you run the pipeline, or the time you run NF core download. So the kinds of things that people typically set in an institutional profile would be basically the setup for your system. So you say, okay, we're using Slurm, or you were using Grid Engine or something like that. You can say on our cluster we have Singularity, so you should be using Singularity or Podman or Docker, whatever. Like I say, it works for all NF core pipelines, so you don't have to do anything. Once you add it in NF core configs repository, it's immediately available to every single NF core pipeline. And of course, the idea is that you make this generic for your cluster, so it's mostly used to be used by people on kind of shared use clusters. So Bookmax is a huge national facility with hundreds and hundreds of users, and any of those users can use minus profile Bookmax, and it will basically just work. They don't have to figure everything out themselves. This is really simple, but really, really powerful. And it's quite a nice reason to use NF Core, because again, if you can get it to work with one pipeline, you should know that basically all the pipelines will work in the same way. Right, finally, nothing to do with us is you can just use your own config files. So if you want to tweak the resource requirements, maybe you're running on a tiny genome and you don't need so much, or you're using some huge genome and you need loads and loads of memory, you can kind of tweak that in these files. You can, of course, specify things specific to just you, like, for example, saving your email address so you don't have to type it in every time. And of course, if you're figuring out how to run on your cluster, you can do it in a custom config file and then add it as an institutional NF Core config later once you're happy. There are typically two ways you supply these files. You can save it into a file in your home directory under the hidden .nextflow folder as a file called config. Nextflow always loads that file whenever you run a pipeline, any Nextflow pipeline. So that's an ideal place to set params.email, for example. And of course, you can also specify it using the -c option whenever you run a Nextflow pipeline. But then you have to remember to do that. So just a very fast recap while we're here about when you're running a pipeline, how configs are passed and used. I'm not going to go into this much because I'm kind of assuming you've talked about this already. But whenever you use Nextflow, you have these ---- options. So when there's 2 hyphens instead of just 1, that's a Nextflow parameter, which is basically passed as params dot whatever you wrote. So instead of doing ---- flags every time you run the NF Core pipelines, which is the standard typical way to do it, ---- input, ---- single end, whatever, you can set all these parameters in a config file and use -c config file, or you can save them in a JSON file or a YAML file and use -params file instead of -c. And generally, I would recommend doing this when you run pipelines because it's better for reproducibility. The pipelines will log the Nextflow command you used. They will log the parameters that you said. So you can always reproduce the run you did. But if you save all the parameters in, for example, a JSON file, it's just very, very clear how you did it. And it's very, very easy to repeat that next time. Right, I stole this from another NF Core member, but it made me laugh because if your head is spinning now, and I don't blame you at all, because this was a lot of configs on a lot of different levels. But don't worry, most of them just happen automatically for free with NF Core. The base configs, the standard profiles, and the institutional profiles are all just there. It's really only choosing which one you need to use and then writing any final custom configs at the end that you need to worry about. And you only have to figure that out once, basically, and then the chances are you will run certainly NF Core pipeline in the same way from then on. So don't freak out. This is not as bad as it sounds, but it's good to kind of understand how the different levels work and interact. Okay, so you've figured out how to configure Nextflow and NF Core to run on your system and you're happy. Probably the first thing to do then when you're trying a new NF Core pipeline is to try and run the test config profile that I mentioned. This is one of the guidelines for NF Core, is that every pipeline must have a minimal test data set, which is just like some really, really small files which will run in a couple of minutes on even the simplest machine. And this runs on all the automated testing we have set up to check that code requests, pull requests are valid. But you can also run it on your system. It runs very quickly, and it basically just checks that your system is set up properly. It checks that the pipeline is working as expected, and it rules out that there's any weird stuff going on with the actual data you want to run. If this works, then it should work when you run your pipeline with real data. And once that does work, you can go on and actually read the documentation on the NF Core website and figure out how to run the pipeline. And this is exactly the same as it would be for any other Nextflow pipeline. But remember that you probably want to detach Nextflow from your terminal. Nextflow runs a process which is running there the whole time. And if you close your terminal or disconnect, the pipeline will stop. So I'd recommend using the -BG background flag for Nextflow, and then that will just kick it off in the background and it's separate. For a long time, I've also used tmux or something like a virtual session, and then you can have lots of different Nextflow sessions running, and you can just say, look at the different tmux things and kind of shell in and out. And on some systems, you can also submit the head Nextflow job into the job queue. So if you're using Grid Engine, you can use kind of SBatch or whatever. If you start looking at the NF Core website for some of the NF Core pipelines, you will see that some of them have a lot of parameters, like an overwhelmingly large number of parameters. Some of them have different requirements. Some must be numbers, some must be less than this, or can only be these values and such things like that. And it can be really tricky to figure out what they all mean, and also make sure you haven't made any typos and stuff like this. And so something we've launched this year, which I'm extremely proud of, is NF Core helper tool and launch wizard, which is called NF Core Launch. And this does two things. It shows you all of the parameters which are available for a given pipeline, and also shows you short help text and extended help text about that parameter, explaining what it does and how to use it. And you can access this in two ways. So there's a way to do it on the website, which I'll show you in a second, or if you're running offline, you can also use the NF Core helper tools with any NF Core pipeline, and it will do it all on a command line prompt instead. Demo. Right. Let's see, NF Core website. So what do I mean about this launch thing? Let's pick a pipeline.
Bill, sorry, we're about like 3 minutes.
Yep,
okay.
I'm just wrapping up now. So I usually use the attack-seek pipeline to demo this because it was one of the first pipelines to have this new feature. So you can see we've got the parameter documentation, which is built automatically using this with all the different parameters here, and you can click on any of them to view the help, as well as kind of prose text about how to run the pipeline under usage docs, and docs describing all the different outputs that the pipeline generates. But you can see this one also has this magic button saying launch. And then this takes me to this special page where it passes all of these different inputs and just gives me them all in the big long list. It puts in defaults if there are defaults for the pipeline. It knows whether some are Boolean, such as true, false. It knows that some should be integers. I can show the help text as I'm typing if I want to, and I can kind of skip through the different sections. This is much, much easier in trying to manually remember all of these different parameters. The other thing that's really nice is I can hit launch, and it will tell me this parameter is required, and it won't let me go until I fix that problem. I think if I try and do something there, then it'll tell me, yeah, this one has to match a pattern. It has to be a valid email address. And the pipeline developers build all this, and I'll talk tomorrow about how, as a pipeline developer, you set all of this up. So let's say input.csv. Once I hit launch, it takes me to a page. There's a very nice button here. If you're using Nextflow Tower, which I think you've touched on already, clicking this will take me to Nextflow Tower directly with all of these inputs pre-filled. So you can just hit launch, which is ridiculously easy. I can also save this params file and just run Nextflow directly like that. If I just kind of running offline or something, I can just paste that into a terminal. Or I can use the NF Core launch helper tool here and just copy this command with this ID. If I run this command, it will fetch this config from a website. It says it found it, and here's the Nextflow command. Do I want to run that command? And if I hit yes, it will kick off Nextflow. But I can also see here that it saved this JSON file with the parameters that I saved in the web form. Just to give you a picture of how it looks offline, I can do launch NF Core attack seek. And I say I want to use it. So I can also select web-based, and it will kick off the same website we saw. And then this will work actually with any Nextflow pipeline that has one of these schema files. Or I can say on the command line, and it will take me through each of these groups and show me help text. It will validate that, again, that I have to fill in required things, for example. So I can say input and put input CSV, Email. Oh, I broke it. Oh dear. Anyway, you get the idea. It does the same thing, and if I follow it all the way through, then it will give me the same parameters file and let me launch the workflow. This is much easier for newcomers, and we're using this file to integrate NF core pipelines all over the place. And this is a kind of feature that we've built within the NF core community, kind of as a standard on top of Nextflow, but we're already trying to kind of push this out, and by signs, things like it being integrated into Tower and stuff, it's kind of starting to impact outside of NF core. It's a really powerful feature. Right. That was my last slide for today. So NF core, if you're interested, all of the code, everything is centralized around GitHub. So that's where we do our work. All of our communication is either on GitHub issues, which is kind of more thread specific things, or we're just chatting, and kind of discussion happens on Slack. We have a pretty active Twitter account, which automatically tweets about new pipeline releases and also anything kind of relevant to NF core. And we have a YouTube channel where we try and stream all of the talks that we do in our NF core events. So if you're interested, have a look on the NF core website and get involved. Yeah, my name is Phil Ewels. I was at SciLifeLab in Sweden, and I'd also like to say a special thank you to Frederica Hansen from Cubic in Germany, who's another member in the NF core community, and she did a great talk in July for a hackathon about how to get started as a user for NF core pipelines, and I stole a lot of material from her talk for today. So kudos to her for writing it up in the first place, and thank you. And yeah, happy to take any questions now.
Thank you, Phil. Well, we have some time for questions.
Hi, thank you for your talk, for a nice talk. Sorry, my mic is there. Okay, thank you for your nice talk. I had a question about the view of the reviewers on the NF core. Is it something accepted? You just put in your material method, I use NF core RNR-seek, and it's accepted, or it's
reviewers
agreed with?
As in when you're writing a manuscript, you mean?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things you can do. Firstly, in our guidelines, we say that every pipeline, but also every pipeline release should have its own DOI, digital object identifier. We use Zenodo to do this. So this makes the pipelines very easy to cite in manuscripts. So you can say, we use this pipeline with this version, here's the DOI. And Zenodo actually keeps an archived copy of the code used there, which is totally separate from everything else. So if I'm hit by a bus tomorrow and all of NF core explodes, Zenodo will still be there with the code that you ran. So it's pretty easy to cite, and especially if you kind of specify the version that you used and the parameters you used, then it's very reproducible for anyone else to run. Everyone's experience varies, but in my experience, this goes down very well with most reviewers because it's clearly very well documented, very reproducible.
Thank you.
I have still a question regarding the versioning of your pipelines. So how do you handle that there's different software versions of programs, like there's a star version coming every few weeks? So how do you include that into the versioning of the pipeline and reproducibility?
Sure. So so the pipelines are typically built using again, the guideline is we recommend that the pipelines all use Bioconda to source their software if at all possible. We say if tools are missing, please try and go and add them yourself. And if it's some exceptions, that's totally impossible, that's fine. But generally we try and use Bioconda. So then the pipelines, up until now anyway, the pipelines have had a Conda environment file where we pin every package used and the exact Bioconda version number used. And then the containers are built from that Conda environment, either Docker or Singularity. And so those containers are tagged on Docker Hub. So the pipeline uses a specific Conda environment or a specific Docker image or a specific Singularity image, which contains all of those specific software versions. So it doesn't matter if star releases a new update because you run your pipeline and the pipeline is tied to this environment, which has this specific star version. If a pipeline developer then does a new release with a new version of star, then that will be used. But the software versions are always tied to the pipeline code itself. The exact mechanism of that is actually just changing as we move to DSL2, but the concept is the same. The software versions are tied to the pipeline code.
So how often would you then update your versioning of the pipelines, considering that there's tens of tools included in the, you most likely would have every week a new version, but that is apparently not feasible for a pipeline. So what is the release cycle for pipelines about in next NF Core?
It varies a lot. I mean, and that is completely up to the users and developers. Pipelines which are being very actively maintained can have a release every couple of months. Some pipelines go longer. Really, that's based on kind of demand. So if you want to have a new version of the software for some reason, it's pretty easy to go in and change it, and you can chat on Slack and talk about doing a new release. And that process is pretty slick and smooth. So if all you're doing is updating software versions, you can do a new release very easily.
Okay, thanks.
Edric, you have your hand raised.
Thank you. I have just a quick question along the same lines. So I think the idea of having an entirely controlled centralized repository is great, because this is the way to go for not only reproducibility, but comparability, across analysis. But at the same time, as you know, it's moving ground in all directions, and lots of new stuff is coming out, new mappers are coming out, the paradigm keep changing. So my question is, how do you feel about the NF Core compliance layer that could exist around NF Core, and that will be new pipelines done without any interaction with NF Core that will be NF Core compliant and could eventually be or not incorporated into NF Core? Have you thought about this, and how do you feel about this possibility?
So what's your question?
My question is whether you think it will potentially harm the NF Core paradigm to allow and possibly even support the existence of NF Core compliant pipelines that will not be part of NF Core, but that could be incorporated in NF Core at short notice because they're already compliant. How do you feel about the existence of this kind of intermediate layer between, wild pipelines and domesticated pipelines, and the ones that are getting close to the water hole every once in a while?
Yeah, I mean that kind of we haven't done anything like that up until now, but it could certainly be interesting. So something to mention is that many of the pipelines support different kind of tracks. So we're not saying that there's one way to do RNA analysis. If you use the RNA-seq pipeline, you can use STAR, but you can also use HiSat2. You can also use Salmon, and those are different parameters. But the key thing is that much of the shared code, the QC before and afterwards, things like that can then be shared within the same pipeline, and it's essentially run using the same way. You just flick the aligner parameter and you switch to a different aligner.
The main benefit I see for NF Core compliance is because some users, for whatever reason, they have their own pipelines, and re-implementing everything is one thing, and using different pipelines will harm their work. But if they make their pipeline NF Core compliant, the interoperability of NF Core will suddenly be available. It'll be able to use all kind of deployment tools and all these kind of things. That's a strong added benefit, and then that's one of the reasons why I tend to encourage. And I'm talking this because in NF Core, in BuffRec, that's one of the things we've been discussing. Some of the members of this community and in FANG, they already have pipelines, and it's a big jump to move into a different pipeline because lots of things need to be recalibrated and all the stuff, while wrapping their pipeline in NF Core is something possible. And it seems to me like a nice progressive entry point into the NF Core galaxy, but I wanted your feeling about this.
Yeah, no, I mean, so the main way that we enforce the NF Core guidelines is by there's a command called NF Core lint, and that runs a whole suite of code checks to make sure that this file exists, that this test is being run, and so on and so on. So anyone can run those lint tests on any pipeline. So yeah, I mean, that could be great to have like a little NF Core certified badge or something. I mean, you can run those lint tests automatically on any workflow, and if you're getting a little green tick, then that effectively means that you're you're pretty much following most of the NF Core guidelines, if not all. And then if you're already there, you've already got the template. If you've used the template, you've got the template synchronization set up, you've got passing lint tests, then yeah, like you say, it would be an easy step to bring that to NF Core.
Okay, Andrea,
So,
I apologize for taking so
yes.
much time, but remind everybody, there is a channel. People will be able, I see plenty of questions stacking. There is a channel to talk with Phil. Maybe, Andrea,
Yes.
you want to...
Actually, I created a dedicated channel for NF Core in our Slack space, and I add Phil there. So maybe you can jump in and ask the questions.
So
Absolutely.
I just wanted to say that we have to thank you, Phil. It was a very... it's a great talk with so it generated lots of questions. I still have questions to make, so I will join afterwards.